A young secretary pressed a crumpled $500 bill into a stranger's hand, her eyes darting to the office door as if afraid of being caught. She thought she was hiring a fake boyfriend just to save face for one lonely weekend. But when he walked in, every head turned, and the air changed. There's something in the way he looked at her that didn't match the lie they'd agreed on. Why would a man like him say yes for so little, and why did he seem to know her better than anyone else? If you've ever felt that one decision could turn your whole world upside down, stay with us. And if this story stirs something in you, like subscribe or leave a thought below. We'd love to hear what you think as the story unfolds. The lobby of the Langham Hotel in Manhattan was bright with the kind of light that showed every flaw. Ava Morales hesitated near the marble check-in desk, eyes tracing the arc of a chandelier overhead. She held herself tall in her navy dress, a simple thing that fit her closely, nothing like the sparkling creations drifting through the room. Her purse, old but carefully polished, swung lightly at her side as she tried to steady her breath. Every move she made felt on display. It was Orion Group's annual gala, an invitation-only event known for its excess and its sharp edges. Ava was a secretary, and she knew where she stood. But tonight, she'd come for more than her job. She'd come for closure, maybe even a little pride. She first noticed Eric Delgado across the expanse of glossy floor. Eric, her ex, the company's vice president, a man whose smile was once gentle, now practiced and distant. He was speaking with the company president, laughter easy, his hand on the shoulder of a board member. When his gaze landed on her, he gave a brief, almost imperceptible shake of his head. Disapproval radiated from him, quiet and sure, like a warning bell in the distance. Ava tried not to flinch. Instead, she shifted closer to the drinks table, half hoping to disappear in the crowd. It didn't work. The manager, a middle-aged man with sharp eyes and a name tag that read Winston, intercepted her before she could settle. "Ma'am, this section is for VIP guests only. I'm going to have to ask you to move back by the main doors." His words echoed in her mind, too formal to be cruel, but the meaning hit hard. Ava could feel the eyes of other guests on her, a few familiar faces from the office, most strangers in expensive suits. They weren't angry. They weren't even curious. She simply didn't belong. Ava felt heat rise in her face, shame, anger, a quick sting of grief. For a moment, she considered arguing. Instead, she turned quietly and made her way back to the lobby entrance, head high but hands trembling. She stopped near the window, watching the reflection of the party behind her. She remembered every year she'd watched from the sidelines, every time she'd patched together an outfit, every time she'd smiled through someone else's promotion or toast. Not this time, she thought. She wouldn't be invisible tonight. A sudden idea flickered to life. If Eric wanted to play these games, if he needed to see her as small, forgettable, she would give him a surprise. She would not be alone. The city outside bustled with weekend energy. She stepped out onto Fifth Avenue, letting the night air cool her cheeks. Across the street was Riverside Cafe, a favorite of Midtown locals and the occasional late-night traveler. Through the window, she saw a man sitting alone, posture relaxed, gaze focused on a book he barely seemed to read. His suit was simple, dark, his movements unhurried. He looked like he belonged anywhere and nowhere at once. Ava didn't let herself hesitate. She pushed open the door, the bell chiming softly. The man, Nathan Chen. She'd heard his name mentioned in office. Gossip glanced up. Their eyes met for the briefest moment. She took the seat across from him, pulled out a folded bill, and slid it across the table. $500, she said quietly, to be my boyfriend tomorrow night. Nathan watched her without surprise. He studied her face, not the money, and seemed to weigh her words. His answer was a nod, silent, sure, unflinching. There was no smile, no joke, no sign that he found the situation strange. Ava found herself matching his steadiness, her resolve hardening. This would be different. She wouldn't let herself be made small by anyone, not Eric, not Winston, not this city. As she stepped back out into the night, the city's noise wrapped around her. She drew a slow breath. Something in the air, had shifted. The following afternoon, the Brooklyn sun slanted through the broad windows of Riverside Cafe, casting long rectangles of light across worn oak tables. The air was heavy with the scent of roasted beans and the low hum of a city moving just beyond the glass. Ava Morales sat by the window, her hands folded tightly around a plain cup of coffee, watching the door each time it opened. She wore the same navy dress from the night before, this time softened by a cardigan, her hair pulled back in a practical knot. There was something vulnerable in the way she stared at the street, as if bracing herself for more rejection. Nathan Chen arrived exactly on time, the cafe door swinging shut behind him with a gentle click. His suit was clean, understated, but cut perfectly to his frame. He didn't walk with the nervous energy of a man uncertain about a blind arrangement. Instead, he moved with quiet assurance, the same confidence Ava had noticed in the coffee shop's dim glow the night before. He sat down opposite her and offered a slight nod. Ava. She looked up, searching his face for signs of condescension or amusement, but found only calm curiosity. His voice was even, warm enough to cut through her initial awkwardness. "Thank you for meeting me here," she managed, trying to sound steady. Nathan folded his hands on the table, his expression attentive. "Tell me what you need." Ava laid out her plan. She spoke in short sentences, unsure how much to reveal about her past with Eric Delgado, the humiliation in the hotel lobby, the desperate need to reclaim some measure of respect in front of her colleagues. Nathan listened without interruption, occasionally nodding, his gaze unwavering. When she finally offered the envelope 5 crisp $100 bills, he didn't reach for it right away. Instead, he asked quietly, "Why me?" The question surprised her. She hesitated, searching for the right words. "You looked like you belonged, and you didn't look at me the way everyone else did." He considered her answer, then took the envelope and tucked it into his pocket. "All right," he said, voice almost gentle. "I'll do it. One night. You have my word." They talked details: the time, the dress code, what he should know about her life, and what she preferred he leave untouched. As they spoke, Ava felt a subtle shift. The anxiety that had weighed her down since the gala began to ease. There was a steadiness in Nathan's manner that made her want to trust him, even as her doubts lingered just beneath the surface. Between sips of coffee, Ava asked about his background. He answered with practiced precision, mentioning graduate school, a history in finance, and a family he didn't see much of these days, yet he never offered too much. There was a careful boundary in everything he said, and she noticed how his eyes sometimes seemed to flicker with a sadness she recognized in herself. Just as their conversation seemed to settle, Ava's gaze drifted to Nathan's jacket, draped over the back of his chair. A slim, embossed employee badge poked out from the inner pocket, one marked with the silver logo of Chen Holdings. It was a name she knew from business news, a financial firm with powerful ties in Manhattan. For a moment, she wondered if she'd gotten in over her head, but Nathan only watched her with that same patient calm, neither confirming nor denying what she'd seen. The air between them grew taut, expectation and uncertainty mingling. Ava realized there was more to Nathan than she'd guessed, something complicated and perhaps dangerous, but she didn't pull back. Instead, she reached for her coffee again, hands steady now. As the afternoon waned, they agreed on one last detail: he would meet her outside the Langham the next evening, dressed to match the world she'd been pushed out of. Nathan stood first, his movements quiet, deliberate. He offered his hand, she took it, her grip firmer than she expected. When he left, she sat a moment longer in the slanting light, thinking of the risk she'd taken and the secret she might have uncovered. She watched him disappear into the crowd, uncertain if she'd just hired help or found an unexpected ally. The Orion Group headquarters in Midtown Manhattan had a different kind of chill from the hotel's lobby, the sort that came not from the air conditioning, but from the way voices echoed in marble and glass. The boardroom on the top floor was already filled with laughter and expensive perfume. Everything about the room, floor-to-ceiling windows, city lights sprawled below. The gentle clink of glass, spoke of power that stayed hidden just below the surface. Ava stood near the edge of the crowd, her posture careful. The fabric of her dress felt thinner under the glow of the overhead lights. She caught her own reflection in the window. A secretary from Brooklyn who had never learned to wear armor like these people did. The room was filled with department heads and investors, each smile a transaction. She recognized some faces from conference calls and company memos, but never as equals. Then Nathan Chen entered, for a heartbeat. The room quieted. He wore a midnight blue suit that seemed both subtle and expensive. His tie knotted with easy precision. He greeted the doorman by name. Every gesture was smooth, respectful, but not obsequious. Just a hint of something learned and polished. There was a pause in the flow of conversation, as if everyone wondered who he really was. Ava felt her nerves tighten. For a moment, she was tempted to apologize, to pull Nathan aside and call the whole thing off. But he was already in motion. He offered his arm, and she took it. His touch was light, a wordless reassurance. "Ready?" he asked quietly, not breaking stride. They moved through the crowd together. Nathan greeted the company's chief financial officer and then an investor from Los Angeles, never missing a beat. The exchanges were polite, but Nathan's questions on funding, on markets, on community engagement were sharp and left no room for vagueness. A few of the board members leaned in, listening, as Nathan offered a casual observation about market trends that cut to the heart of a tense discussion. The room began to adjust around him, executives shifting their tone, a subtle recalibration of respect. Ava felt exposed. She was the one who belonged on the margins, not at the center. Yet here she was on Nathan's arm as if she were someone. Eric Delgado, tall and composed in his tailored tuxedo, watched from across the room. There was something in his expression, a flicker of irritation, a tightening of his jaw that told Ava her plan was working, perhaps better than she'd hoped. Nathan remained at her side, never overplaying his role, never letting the performance become spectacle. He excused himself from a knot of executives and returned to her, voice soft and steady. "You're holding up," he murmured, offering her a drink. She met his gaze, surprised by the warmth she found there. At the height of the evening, the group gathered for a short round of speeches. Eric took the microphone first, his words smooth but pointed. He mentioned hard work and loyalty with a tone that, to Ava, sounded like a warning. When applause faded, Nathan leaned in and spoke quietly so only she could hear. "I have something to tell you, not tonight, but soon." Ava looked up, caught off guard by the seriousness in his eyes. The party spun on around the music, conversation, flashes of light from camera phones. Yet she felt herself pinned to the moment, questions rising faster than she could answer. Nathan's hand lingered just a second on her shoulder as the room shifted around them. And for once, she felt the balance tip in her favor, even as new uncertainty pressed in. He said nothing more, just waited for her to look back, as if the answer was written in the way the city flickered against the glass. The city lights were coming on across Manhattan as Ava followed Nathan into the soaring glass tower that bore the name Chen Holdings in brushed silver at its entrance. The ride up was quiet, broken only by the hush of the elevator and the distant hum of traffic below. Her nerves were raw from the evening's performance at Orion Group. Nathan's steady presence beside her offered little comfort now. Questions had begun to swirl, and every moment of the party replayed in her mind his quick, precise answers to investors. The way even the most senior executives seemed to recognize something in him she couldn't place. Nathan led her through a silent reception area and into a corner office with views stretching from the river to the southern tip of the city. The space was modern, but warm, exposed steel, deep walnut, and shelves lined with books and artifacts from a life spent at the center of business. Ava's gaze flicked over framed degrees, awards, and a wall-mounted screen showing global financial indices scrolling by. She tried not to show how out of place she felt, standing in a room where decisions worth millions were made over quiet phone calls and simple nods. Nathan gestured for her to sit. He moved behind his desk, not with the detachment of a man hiding behind power, but as someone searching for the right words. Ava sat, folding her hands in her lap, waiting. He took a deep breath and opened a slim folder, sliding it across to her. Inside, she saw copies of stock certificates, quarterly reports, and a list of board meeting dates. The names Chen Holdings, Orion Group leapt out at her, the connections painfully clear. Nathan was not just a helpful stranger or a polished guest. He was the CEO of one of the largest financial firms in the city and a controlling stakeholder in her own company. Ava stared at the documents. Her breath caught somewhere between a gasp and a cry. The realization landed hard. She hadn't just rented an escort for the night. She had walked into a world of power that made her more vulnerable than ever. Why, she asked quietly, her voice almost lost in the vastness of the office. Why did you do this? Why not just tell me who you are? Nathan's face was serious, almost sad. I didn't want to use my position to intimidate you. If I'd revealed everything at once, you might never have trusted me. I wanted you to see that I was willing to help without expecting anything in return. She felt heat rise in her cheeks, part anger, part humiliation. You didn't give me a real choice, she said, voice sharper than she intended. You stood by while I made a fool of myself. All of this was, just a project to you. Nathan shook his head, his tone urgent. No, you're not a project. Ava, I saw someone fighting to hold her own in a world that's not built for her. I know that feeling. I wanted to stand with you, not above you. She rose, hands shaking. You could have just told me. I hate games like this. For a moment, the city lights seemed to blur. It isn't fair to hide behind all this money, influence, secrets. I've had enough of being managed by other people's power. Nathan watched her cross to the window, her silhouette outlined by the city's evening glow. I'll prove to you this isn't a game, he said quietly. Tomorrow, I'll sign over my shares in Orion. I'll step away from every vote and every meeting that touches your career. I'd rather lose my stake than lose your trust. Ava stood in silence, the promise hanging between them like the lights beyond the glass. She wanted to believe him, but her heart was a knot of doubt and hope. She didn't look back as she left the office, her footsteps soft on the polished floor. Nathan remained, watching the city, his reflection mingling with hers on the window's dark surface, two figures standing apart, bound by choices that could not be undone. He said nothing, just stood there, watching the lights come on, like they could reveal what words could not. Ava's footsteps echoed along the polished marble floors of Orion Group's Midtown Manhattan headquarters. Morning sunlight streamed through glass walls, but it did little to warm the corridors, each lined with framed awards and photos of smiling executives. She kept her eyes down, hugging a folder close to her chest. Her mind replayed the tense conversation with Nathan in his office the night before the confession, the promises, the sudden distance she'd put between them. Since the gala, things had shifted. Whispers moved faster than emails through the building. People she'd worked beside for years exchanged glances as she passed. There was something brittle in the way the receptionist greeted her polite, but with a hint of suspicion. Even the interns, who once came to her for help with timesheets and coffee orders, now avoided her gaze. Ava felt every inch of her outsider status. The office had always been competitive, but now the air bristled with unspoken questions. She caught pieces of conversation as she made her way to her desk. Did you see who she came with? Some big shot from downtown. Maybe she's angling for a promotion. The words were knives, dressed as jokes. Each one found its mark. She set her things down and took a deep breath, forcing herself to focus on the morning's work. Her inbox overflowed with requests, most from people who now treated her like a stranger. Only one person, Lauren from accounting, sent a quick message checking in. You okay? Ignore the office noise. People love gossip. Ava managed a small smile at the screen, but the comfort was fleeting. As she stepped into the break room for coffee, she ran into Martin, her former mentor and a middle manager she'd trusted since her first day. He was pouring himself tea, his back straight, movements clipped. He looked up, eyes scanning her face for clues. Rough night, Morales. She tried for casual, You could say that. Martin's tone was more formal than usual. Nathan Chen. Interesting company for someone in your position. People notice those things. Ava felt herself tense. It's not what everyone thinks. He was just helping out. Nothing more. He held her gaze, something unreadable in his expression. Careful who you trust around here. Ava, this place eats its own if you're not careful, especially when money's involved. She nodded, not trusting herself to say more. The message was clear, you're on your own now. Back at her desk, the pressure mounted. Meetings felt colder. Colleagues who used to invite her for lunch now made excuses. Ava answered calls with extra caution, her voice measured, never giving away more than she had to. Mid-afternoon. Her cell phone vibrated. The number was blocked. She hesitated, then answered. Silence at first, then a man's voice, low and deliberate. You don't belong in their world. People get hurt when they try to play games with the elite. Consider this your only warning. A chill moved through her, colder than the air conditioning. She tried to respond, but the call ended abruptly. The empty tone buzzed in her ear. Ava sat motionless, the world of spreadsheets and email fading to the background. Her heart pounded with a mix of fear and anger at the threats, at her own loneliness, at how quickly alliances had dissolved. She thought about Nathan's promise, Martin's warning, and the shadows that now seemed to lengthen in every corridor she walked. She pressed her hand to the desk, grounding herself. Around her, the office chatter rolled on, oblivious to the tremor in her world. She stared at the phone, wondering whose voice might call next, and whether anyone would be there if she decided to answer. The hum of city life faded into a quiet rhythm as dusk settled over Ava's small apartment in Queens. She sat at her battered kitchen table, paperwork and folders spread before her in uneven stacks. The soft glow of a single lamp turned the room golden, while the rest of her home was cast in shadow. In the background, the faint noise of a neighbor's television drifted through thin walls, but Ava hardly noticed. Her mind was fixed on the lines and numbers that had become a map to her recent confusion financial reports, meeting memos, internal emails, all from her years at Orion Group. Her fingers worked methodically, highlighting entries, searching for patterns, anything that might help her make sense of the company's tangled web. When she paused to rub her tired eyes, a sheet slipped loose from the bottom of a thick folder. A small photograph fluttered to the ground, landing face up near her feet. Ava leaned down to pick it up. The image was crisp, well preserved. Two men, one middle-aged and the other much younger Nathan, unmistakable in his sharp suit and serious expression, stood side by side before a dark blue backdrop bearing the names Chen Holdings and Orion Group. The older man, graying at the temples and dignified, had his hand on Nathan's shoulder. In the background, a crowd of executives and press looked on, frozen in a moment of celebration. The event placard read, Strategic Partnership Signing Ceremony, Philadelphia. She stared at the photograph, trying to process the connection. Nathan, so familiar yet suddenly distant. His father, apparently a figure of power in his own right. There was something in Nathan's eyes, a weariness, maybe pride, maybe resignation. The edges of the photo trembled slightly in her grip. She wondered why this image, hidden among company records, had found its way to her hands now. Ava's thoughts tumbled through the past few days. The poised, mysterious man she had hired for a charade. His unflinching confidence in every boardroom. The way he never quite revealed himself, always stepping around the truth. She felt both betrayed and drawn in, unsure if she should fear his secrets or trust his intentions. There was no longer any doubt Nathan's involvement with Orion ran far deeper than a single night at a gala. Her phone buzzed against the tabletop. She flinched, expecting another anonymous warning or some new rumor. Instead, Eric's name appeared. She hesitated, then answered. Eric's voice was clipped, his impatience barely masked. Ava, I need you to stop whatever it is you're doing with Chen. The board is watching. You're putting yourself and me in a bad position. She pressed the photo flat on the table, her fingers covering Nathan's face. I'm not doing anything wrong. Why are you so afraid of him?" He let out a sharp laugh. "All edges. This isn't a game. Nathan Chen doesn't just play to win, he plays to destroy. If you're smart, you'll walk away. Last warning." The line clicked dead. Ava sat back, heart pounding. The old loyalty she'd once felt for Eric, his easy charm, his confidence had curdled into something dark and sour. She traced the outlines of the men in the photo, searching for clues. Her thoughts shifted from self-doubt to resolve. The time for passivity was over. She needed answers. Late that night, she sent an encrypted message to a contact in Philadelphia, someone she trusted to check public records and old news clippings. The name Chen had weight there. She combed through old emails, searching for any hint of the partnership signing. A few cryptic references to Freedom Plaza, a favored venue for business summits and high-level negotiations, caught her attention. Morning broke, gray and uncertain. Ava took the photograph and slipped it into her purse. Her mind was clear, her decision made. She packed a small overnight bag and booked a train ticket to Philadelphia. Eric's threats still rang in her ears, but so did Martin's warning and Nathan's promise. Whatever lay behind the smiling faces in the photo, she would find out. As she stepped onto the platform at Penn Station, she felt a strange steadiness. The city churned around her, uncaring and loud, but for the first time in days, she moved with purpose. She looked at the train, thinking of secrets waiting in the heart of Philadelphia, and wondered just how much further she'd have to go before the truth would let her rest. Rain from an early evening storm left the bricks of Freedom Plaza slick and shining, reflecting the neon haze from street lamps and headlights. Ava stepped out of the cab with the old photograph pressed flat inside her purse, her coat collar turned up against the lingering chill. She crossed the plaza, where city life swirled as always, commuters hurrying to trains, vendors folding up for the night, laughter rolling from crowded restaurants. There was nothing unusual about a woman arriving alone, but Ava walked with purpose, feeling the weight of questions and a dull pulse of anxiety in her chest. Inside a narrow cafe tucked along the edge of the plaza, Marcus was already waiting at a small corner table. He had aged since their college days, lines deeper around his eyes, but the same spark of quick intelligence was there. He rose with a warm but wary smile as Ava slid into the seat across from him. The windows rattled with each passing bus. For a while, their conversation meandered, polite and cautious. Marcus probing her motives with simple questions, and Ava answering with only as much as she dared to reveal. After 2 cups of coffee and a soft clatter of rain on glass, Marcus's tone shifted. "You want to know why Nathan hides in plain sight? Why a man with his means plays at being ordinary?" He gave a crooked half smile, almost proud and almost sad. "He's been fighting his own family since before you ever met. There's a tradition in Chen Holdings' old ways, old debts. His father expected him to fit a role, but Nathan wanted something more, something honest. But power in that world doesn't come clean." Ava's gaze flicked to the photo she'd slipped from her purse. "I found this among Orion's documents. It's from the ceremony in Philadelphia." "Right." She pushed the picture across the table. Marcus glanced at it, then looked up, eyes sharper now. That was the night his father made Nathan an heir. Also, the night he made enemies inside and out. When Nathan tries to do things his way, people get nervous. People who like the status quo. Ava studied Marcus, measuring trust against suspicion. "Do you mean the board, or someone else?" Marcus lowered his voice. "I'm saying there are people at Chen Holdings, and at Orion, who'd rather see Nathan disappear than see him take charge. They're old money, old power. If you keep walking with him, they'll come for you too." A tremor of unease traveled down Ava's spine, but she pushed on. "Why tell me this? Why not warn Nathan himself? Because you're the one he listens to now, maybe the only one." Marcus's gaze softened, regret mingling with hope. He cares more than he lets on. The cafe's door opened with a jingle, and a gust of wet air swept in. Ava tensed as she noticed a tall man in a dark coat linger by the counter, scanning the room before ordering nothing. Their eyes met for a second, cold and appraising. and he looked away, but not before she caught the glint of a wire in his ear. Ava's breath caught, a cold rush of dread making her pulse thump in her wrists. She whispered, "Is someone following me?" Marcus's face grew still. Nathan's not the only one with eyes in this city. He slid a napkin toward her, a scribbled phone number barely visible under his hand. "If things go wrong, call this. Don't trust anyone from Chen. Not now." Ava's thoughts spun with warnings, memories, and every small oddity of the last week. The stranger at the counter pretended to read a menu, but his gaze kept drifting their way. It was the kind of vigilance born not of curiosity, but of instruction. A threat from somewhere behind the polite world of finance and bright city lights. Their conversation stalled, both suddenly alert. Marcus covered the old photograph with his palm and whispered, "Take care of him, Ava. He's not the only one who could lose everything." Ava nodded, her mind whirring. She left the cafe first, stepping into the plaza's electric light, Marcus following a minute later. She forced herself not to look back, but the prickle between her shoulder blades grew sharper with every step. The city pressed in indifferent, massive, and full of secrets. As Ava blended into the shifting crowd, she felt the old balance tip, from curiosity to danger, from playing a part to living on the edge of something real. Night fell fast over Manhattan, throwing sharp shadows across the steel and glass of Freedom Tower. Inside the gleaming event hall, the pulse of anticipation was unmistakable. Waiters in crisp uniforms glided through the crowd, glasses chiming softly, while the great and the good of Orion Group gathered in their finest. Cameras flashed, capturing polished shoes, jeweled wrists, and carefully measured smiles. Ava walked in at Nathan's side, every step echoing in her chest, as if it belonged to someone else. The chill of the city still clung to her shoulders, but Nathan's quiet presence at her elbow offered a strange reassurance. She could feel eyes tracking their progress across the marble floor. The head of marketing whispered behind her hand. An assistant from finance glanced between her and Nathan, her mouth set in a tight line. Ava straightened, holding her chin high. She wore her most elegant black dress, borrowed pearls at her throat, and shoes that pinched Nathan in a charcoal suit that fit with effortless precision, nodded to familiar faces as if he owned the room, but never let his distance from Ava stretch more than a few careful inches. At the far end of the hall, Eric Delgado, sharp in a midnight blue tuxedo, hair slicked back to perfection, waited among a cluster of board members and investors. He barely nodded when Ava caught his gaze. She recognized that look a challenge, cold and certain. As the crowd pressed closer for the evening's first round of speeches, Eric seized the microphone with the ease of a man accustomed to being heard. "Ladies and gentlemen," Eric began, voice cool and practiced. "Tonight marks another chapter in Orion Group's history. Our vision for growth is bold, and we choose our partners carefully." His words hovered just on the edge of insult, glancing at Nathan, then Ava, then away, like he was giving the room permission to judge. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some guests laughed softly, others watched with sharp curiosity. Nathan kept his hands folded in front of him, face unreadable. But Ava saw a flicker of tension in the set of his jaw. He didn't flinch. Instead, when the time came, he stepped to the podium with measured calm, his eyes lingering on Ava for half a second, as if drawing strength from her presence. "Orion's future depends on our willingness to adapt," Nathan said, his voice clear and unhurried. "Innovation is born when we welcome new perspectives, even if they come from unexpected places. My proposal tonight is not only an investment strategy, it's a challenge to all of us to build something lasting, together." His words drew the room in. Numbers and projections flashed on the screens behind him, but it was his steadiness, the way he acknowledged past failures, and dared the board to risk more, that made the old guard sit straighter. For a moment, even Eric fell silent, lips pressed in a hard line. But tension was thick beneath the surface. As the evening wore on, Ava noticed the security staff moving more deliberately near the exits, speaking in low voices over their radios. She drifted toward the refreshments table, overheard snippets of worried conversation, rumors about threats, warnings that had come in through back channels. Just as Nathan was fielding questions from a panel of skeptical shareholders, a commotion broke out near the hall's service entrance. A guard in a dark blazer hurried toward the main stage, his hand pressed to his earpiece. Eric tried to seize the moment, his voice pitched loud above the noise. "Perhaps this is what happens when we let outsiders rewrite our story." He sneered, gesturing at Nathan. Before Nathan could respond, a piercing alarm cut through the noise. First a shrill, insistent beep, then a wailing siren that echoed off the marble columns. Lights overhead flickered as security scrambled to clear the floor, their calm instructions masking a sharper edge of urgency. The entire room seemed to tilt as uncertainty swept through the crowd. Some guests gasped, others pressed toward the exits. Eric turned white, then red. Fingers clenched at his sides. Nathan's hand found Ava's in the chaos, steadying her with a brief squeeze. She looked up and met his eyes, no longer cool, but fierce and full of intent. The world narrowed to that single moment. People shouting, feet pounding, the future spinning out in a direction none of them had expected. The blare of the alarm rang through the Freedom Tower, echoing off glass and marble as panic swept the gala floor. Guests in evening wear spilled toward the exits, some shouting instructions, others clinging to loved ones or clutching their phones for news. The once composed hall had broken apart, all elegance erased by the sharp urgency of the moment. In the center of it all, Ava kept her grip on Nathan's hand, anchoring herself in the storm of movement and confusion. Nathan's face was calm, his voice low but steady as he spoke into his earpiece. "We need a controlled evacuation. No one heads for the elevators, direct everyone to the stairs." His tone was so sure, so measured, it cut through the fear, earning the quick obedience of the nearest staff. Security guards followed his lead, forming a line to guide guests toward the proper exits. Ava watched him move through the chaos with a quiet authority, nodding encouragement, steadying trembling shoulders with a gentle touch. For a moment, she forgot the lines that separated them, the world of power and money Nathan came from. The humble place she'd always believed was hers alone. Eric Delgado stood off to one side, lips twisted in frustration, phone pressed to his ear. He barked orders at someone out of sight, his control over the situation clearly slipping. All around him, loyalists tried to rally, whispering together in tense clusters. Rumors flew: a gas leak, a bomb threat, an act of sabotage from a rival company. Ava caught pieces of conversation as she moved past frightened guests. "He's behind it. I'm sure of it. It's all for show. You'll see. Don't trust anyone tonight." Nathan pulled her gently aside, away from the crowd pressing toward the stairwell. His eyes held hers, searching. "You all right?" he asked, voice softer now, letting a note of concern break through. She nodded, breath still shaky. "Just stay close," she said, drawing strength from the simple truth of it. "I'm not leaving without you." They moved as a team, helping elderly guests and guiding those too panicked to listen. In those few minutes, Ava saw a new side of Nathan, one that thrived in crisis, not just in boardrooms. His hand never left hers, and his calm presence was like a promise they would get through this, together. But beneath the surface, a deeper game was playing out. As the main floor cleared, Nathan caught sight of two security officers detaining a man near the service entrance, a former Orion accountant, recently dismissed. The man's face was pale and drawn, eyes darting wildly. A low voice, urgent and grim, whispered to Nathan from one of his own aides. "We intercepted him with a security pass and an unregistered laptop. Claims he had orders from someone on the executive team to disrupt the event." Nathan's gaze sharpened. He stepped forward, questioning the man briefly, then nodded for security to take him away. It was the missing piece. The sabotage was no accident. Somewhere in the shadows, someone wanted this night to end in disaster. As the pieces clicked together, Nathan's eyes found Eric across the now emptying hall. Eric's expression was unreadable, part anger, part fear. Their rivalry had always been professional, but tonight something darker had surfaced. Ava, standing beside Nathan, felt the temperature of the room drop. She saw Eric watching them, jaw set, the weight of unspoken threats in his gaze. There was no more hiding behind polite smiles or staged charity. Now, the lines were drawn in the open. Nathan squeezed Ava's hand one last time before letting go, walking straight toward Eric as the lights flickered and sirens still wailed in the background. She followed the tension in the air, her heart beating fast, not just from fear, but from something like pride. She saw in Nathan a courage that went beyond business deals or high society parties. For the first time, she believed he might fight for more than his own legacy. He stopped just short of Eric, their eyes locked, surrounded by the remnants of shattered glass and fading glamour. Ava could only watch, breath held, as the future of everything they'd built trust, partnership, something unspoken hung in the balance between them, like a silent dare waiting to be answered. The city lights shimmered below as Ava entered Nathan's office in the soaring downtown tower. The world outside seemed impossibly far away, a patchwork of headlights, quiet bridges, and the restless flow of the East River. Inside, the silence was heavy, broken only by the soft click of Nathan's laptop and the distant hum of air conditioning. Ava's hands trembled as she laid the newly discovered documents and her phone, screen aglow with voice memos, on the polished conference table. Nathan sat across from her, jacket discarded, sleeves rolled to his elbows. His eyes met hers, searching for strength but finding worry. "Eric's hands are deeper in this than we thought," he said quietly, sliding a file across to her. Inside were scanned contracts, timestamps, emails from shell companies, names neither of them recognized, all linking back to accounts in Eric's control. Ava listened as Nathan played a recording, his voice calm but bitter. The audio was grainy, but clear enough. Eric speaking with a rival Orion investor, arranging a sale that would transfer voting power away from the original board, the price silence about years of shady deals and the promise of a golden parachute. Ava's jaw tightened as the reality sank in. She'd spent so long thinking the lines between rich and poor were clear, one world pushing down on the other, never crossing. Now, she realized, greed cut through every barrier. Eric had used both privilege and secrecy as his weapons, and it made her feel naive for ever believing in simple heroes and villains. Nathan watched her carefully, the tension showing in the set of his shoulders. He wants the company for himself. He's gambling with people's jobs, pensions, their lives, all for more power. He stood, restless, moving to the window. "I thought if I kept my name out of the public fight, I could protect you and everyone else from the crossfire. Maybe I was wrong." Ava swallowed the knot in her throat. "You didn't trust me." Her voice was soft, but edged with pain. "You let me walk into those rooms with Eric, knowing what he was. You let them treat me like I was nothing." Nathan didn't look away. "You were never nothing to me, Ava, but I was afraid of what might happen if I put you in the middle of this. My name, my family, they come with enemies. I wanted you to have a choice." Ava's fingers traced the edge of a contract, trying to steady herself. She felt both exposed and strangely free, as if the lies had finally lifted. "I have a choice now," she said quietly. "I'm not running, not from you, and not from him." Nathan nodded, a slow pride building in his eyes. "Then let's finish this. No more secrets, no more shadows." He moved to the safe, pulling out a stack of papers, documents authorizing the transfer of his own shares. "If I walk away from Orion, Eric loses the leverage he has over me and over you. I'll give up my stake. I can rebuild. What matters is the people we protect, not the seats we keep." Ava's breath caught at the boldness of it. She realized, maybe for the first time, the depth of Nathan's resolve. Not just a man who played at power, but one willing to risk everything to draw a line against corruption. It was more than she expected, and more than she'd thought herself worthy of. Their eyes met again, quiet, raw, nothing left hidden. Just then, Nathan's assistant knocked on the glass. She handed him a sealed envelope with urgent markings. Nathan opened it, eyes scanning the lines, his lips pressed thin, a chill settling over him. Eric knows, he said, voice low. He's just been notified about the share transfer. He's going to retaliate, and he won't care who he hurts to do it. Ava felt the moment shift. The stakes weren't just about business or headlines anymore. Eric's world was one of icy calculation, and now he'd lost his last bit of control. She saw the resolve harden in Nathan, a final wall rising between them and the old games of the powerful. As the night stretched on, the city below seemed to hold its breath. Inside that quiet office, two people once separated by fear, pride, and all the old rules stood side by side, waiting for whatever would come next. And somewhere in the silence, Ava wondered just how far Eric would go to keep his world intact. Sunlight poured through the high windows of the Orion Group's boardroom, cutting hard lines across polished wood and crisp suits. It should have felt like any other quarterly meeting, a room full of anticipation and small power plays. The press waiting beyond glass doors, but this morning there was a tension that crackled in the air, a sense that every word spoken would tip the scales. Ava sat close to Nathan at the long table, her back straight, eyes focused, refusing to show how fast her heart was beating. Nathan, poised and resolute, glanced at her just once before the meeting began, a silent reassurance that they were in this together. Eric entered with his usual self-assured stride, but there was a faint shadow behind his eyes. Rumors had moved through the building like a chill draft, Nathan's decision to relinquish his shares, the mysterious files that had made their way into the hands of trusted board members, and Ava's name, suddenly on everyone's lips. No one spoke of the previous night's chaos, but it hung over them all, unspoken and heavy. The meeting began formally enough, with the lead counsel summarizing agenda items and market reports. But soon Eric cut in, his voice sharper than usual, pressing the group to vote on new restrictions for shareholder authority rules designed to isolate Nathan and silence dissent. As he spoke, Eric's gaze flicked to Ava, lingering just a moment too long. She met his look with cool defiance. She knew what he wanted to scare her back into silence, to make her doubt Nathan, to make her doubt herself. When it came time for open discussion, Nathan spoke clearly, laying out the network of deals Eric had tried to bury. His words were measured, but unflinching. What's at stake here is more than money. It's trust. It's the future of everyone who believes this company stands for something real. Ava, her voice steadier than she felt, followed him. She described what she'd witnessed, how intimidation and manipulation had flourished in the shadows. She named names, cited dates. As she spoke, something shifted in the room, a sense that the old lines of loyalty were blurring. Some board members looked away, but more leaned in, listening, weighing her words. Eric tried to interrupt, but a senior director long known as Eric's quiet ally raised his hand. The man, Mr. Baird, was always even-tempered, rarely taking sides, but today, he surprised everyone. I've reviewed the documents. I've spoken with staff. I no longer believe the path we're on is the right one. He pushed his chair back, standing with slow determination. I support Nathan's proposal, and I will not be part of any vote that is forced through threats or fear. A hush swept the room. Eric's jaw clenched, his composure slipping as more members nodded in agreement. The balance of power, so carefully guarded for years, shifted before everyone's eyes. Reporters pressed against the glass, cameras blinking to life as word spread. The outside world was about to see the true fight inside these walls. Ava felt the knot in her chest loosen a bit. For the first time, she saw hope, real hope, that they could change more than just who sat at the head of the table. But as the meeting adjourned, a junior assistant hurried to her side with an envelope. For you, Ms. Green. It came through private email. She opened it with trembling fingers. The message was simple, direct, and chilling. Back down now, or you won't make it to the next meeting. This is your only warning. The boardroom emptied around her, the buzz of conversation growing louder. Ava stood still, email burning in her hand, feeling the weight of every eye and every secret. And in that breathless moment, she realized the real battle was only just beginning. St. George Law Firm's main conference hall carried a solemn weight that morning. The walls, lined with oil portraits of stoic men in old-fashioned suits, seemed to press in on the gathered crowd, all waiting for what would come next. It was the kind of day when New York felt smaller, colder. Ava stood alone just outside the great glass doors, one hand clutching her folder of evidence, the other pressed to her side. She took a slow breath, feeling the nerves dance beneath her skin, and pushed forward into the light. Inside, the room was full. Partners from the law firm, Orion Group's legal team, several board members, and an odd handful of junior staffers crowded every seat. Journalists lingered outside, muffled behind a pane of soundproof glass. The air was tense, thick with the anticipation of a fight that mattered. As she walked to her place, conversation died away. The only sound was the click of her low heels on the marble floor. At the front, the panel sat behind a long table, 3 senior partners, 1 external arbitrator, and a woman from HR who had always seemed kind enough, but whose face this morning was unreadable. On her left, Nathan watched her take her seat. Their eyes met for a second, just long enough for Ava to see the trust and worry in his face. She drew from it, holding herself tall as she laid out her papers. The lead partner spoke, his voice measured. "Ms. Green, you're here today to answer to the charges raised within Orion Group. You may begin your statement." All eyes waited. Some curious, some cold. Ava's voice was quiet at first, but it didn't shake. She described what she had witnessed Eric's efforts to intimidate and manipulate, the threats that had landed in her inbox, the coordinated efforts to keep Nathan from exerting any real control. As she spoke, the room seemed to shrink. No one dared interrupt her. She produced emails, minutes of meetings, and the mysterious recordings she and Nathan had found. She laid out each piece slowly, so nothing would be missed. The opposition's attorney objected a few times, but the panel let Ava continue. She kept her eyes on the facts, trying not to show how deeply each memory had cut her, but her voice caught, just once, describing the day she found the threat in her email. The panel noted it. The silence after each fact felt heavier than any cross-examination. As the questions began, Ava answered plainly. She refused to be goaded by insinuations about her motives or her relationship with Nathan. She owned every step she'd taken, even the ones that had left her exposed. She pointed out how Eric had used his power and how several on the board had profited from silence. Each answer was deliberate. She did not flinch. Then, just as the tone of the hearing began to harden, one of the panelists, a board member whom no one had expected to speak, asked for the floor. He'd always been considered neutral, careful with his words, the kind who waited until after the storm to pick a side. But today, he surprised everyone. "I have seen these documents," he said, his voice rough, "and I have seen Ms. Green's conduct here and over the past months. I believe her account, and I can confirm that certain actions described align with records I have access to." The whole room shifted, as if everyone let out a breath at once. Eric's attorney tried to protest, but the panelist's testimony hung in the air. The lead partner leaned back, suddenly, very still. The questions turned. Now, instead of attacking, the tone grew measured, serious, an effort to understand rather than destroy. Ava looked down, pressing her thumb hard into the folder in her lap, feeling the change, letting hope bloom where only fear had been. The clock on the far wall chimed, clear and loud, marking the hour for the next session, a formal trial, where everything would be laid out before a judge. People stood, gathering their belongings, whispers rising. Ava stayed seated for a moment, watching the sunlight move across the table, knowing the fight was not over yet, and that every truth now waited for the world to see. The court chamber at St. George Law Firm was nearly at capacity, the soft buzz of the nervous conversation running like static under the old chandeliers. The trial had reached a fever pitch. Every major shareholder of Orion Group was present. Legal teams crowded behind laptops. Outside, news vans idled at the curb, waiting for any word to trickle out from inside those thick glass doors. The judge, An older woman with lines deepened by decades of arbitration presided with an even hand, but even she could not hide the curiosity in her eyes as the next witness was called. Ava sat at the front, her fingers twined together on the table, breath shallow but steady. Nathan, beside her, kept his gaze locked on Eric, whose face had hardened into a mask. The air was heavy. Every seat was taken. Then, the double doors opened. The hush was immediate. In stepped a woman no one had expected, a former senior manager under Eric, someone whose name had been little more than a rumor since she'd taken early retirement. Her walk was careful but proud, hair drawn back in a no-nonsense knot. She clutched a slim folder. Ava recognized her instantly, Linda Warner, the manager who had overseen Orion's legal and financial compliance in years past. She took the witness stand. Her voice, though soft, carried to every corner of the room. "I was responsible for internal compliance at Orion for 12 years, she began, looking directly at Eric. "I saw things. I chose silence, thinking I was protecting the company. Today, I want to set the record straight." The room barely breathed. Linda described, in plain terms, the many ways Eric had bent the rules, funneling confidential documents to third parties, stacking board votes with silent proxies, manipulating share prices with veiled threats. Each word struck like a hammer. At first, Eric's eyes narrowed in contempt, but as she continued, a flicker of panic ran across his features. Even the judge sat forward, scribbling notes. Ava felt her heart pound in her chest, relief and dread battling inside her. She saw the faces around the room change, skepticism giving way to shock, then anger, then something like hope. This was what they needed. A voice from inside, someone who knew and could not be ignored. Nathan reached beneath the table, squeezing her hand once, not for comfort, but for resolve. Midway through her testimony, Linda paused and withdrew a yellowed envelope from her folder. "This," she said, holding it up, "is a memo from 5 years ago, proof that Eric Delgado ordered the purchase of Orion shares through a shell company in violation of our own bylaws." Gasps broke out in the gallery. Even the opposition counsel blanched. For the first time since the trial began, Eric looked genuinely small. His shoulders hunched, eyes darting between Linda and the judge, as if searching for an escape route that no longer existed. The room's attention was absolute. The judge instructed the evidence be reviewed, and the memo was handed off, its contents spreading through the room in ripples. Ava could almost see the dominoes falling. She watched Eric, expecting defiance, but instead she saw something more complicated, a flicker of regret, buried beneath pride and fear. For a split second, she wondered what he must be feeling, losing everything not with a bang, but with the slow, relentless tide of truth. As the testimony ended, the legal teams rushed to adjust their strategy. Ava could sense the shift, the weight of the trial pivoting their way. She felt stronger, steadier, as if her place in this fight was finally justified. The judge ordered a recess, voices breaking out all over the room, everyone scrambling to process what they had just heard. In that swirl, a new message landed in Nathan's inbox. It was marked urgent, flagged with the same warning code as the threats before. This one hinted at a hidden file buried deep in the company archives that could tie Eric's actions not just to financial misdeeds, but to a wider web of corruption. It was a thread waiting to be pulled, a door newly cracked open. Ava and Nathan exchanged a glance that needed no words. Something was changing, and the momentum was theirs for the taking, if only they dared to reach for it. The city outside St. George law firm seemed quieter than usual, but inside, the tension only thickened. The trial's echo lingered in the marble halls, and the taste of victory so close, almost tangible, kept slipping just beyond Ava's reach. It was evening when she and Nathan stepped into the chilly air, cameras flashing, microphones pressed forward. They kept their heads high, saying little. As they left the courthouse, Nathan squeezed her shoulder. She understood what he meant. "We're not done. Overnight." The mood in the media turned. Headlines cast doubt on the testimony, fueled by anonymous sources. Online, trolls and shadowy accounts spread rumors about Ava's motives, even questioning her relationship with Nathan. Morning brought a new round of calls from anxious investors. Messages from friends alternated between support and unease. Ava felt the pressure in her bones. But when she looked at Nathan over breakfast in their small kitchen papers, laptops, and legal pads spread across the table, she saw the same unshakable resolve that had carried him through every storm before. Their phones never stopped ringing. Board members demanded reassurance. Some, emboldened by Eric's allies, called for an emergency session to reconsider the company's leadership. The building's sense of siege was impossible to ignore, but for every voice sowing doubt, another quietly offered hope, a nod in the hallway, an email of encouragement, a discreet promise to vote their way if things came to a head. It was a war of nerves, fought as much in silence as with words. Ava and Nathan spent the next 2 days in near constant motion, meeting with stakeholders at coffee shops, in glass-walled conference rooms, over hurried lunches in anonymous diners. Ava noticed how fatigue showed around Nathan's eyes, how his hand lingered on her arm longer than before. They made a good team, she with her directness, he with his patience, each picking up where the other faltered. Late one night, as they reviewed documents in Nathan's home office, Ava's voice broke. "Do you ever wonder if we're fighting for the right thing?" she asked. Nathan just watched her for a moment, silent, before answering. "I know it's right because it costs so much. Easy things don't change the world." His smile was tired, but true. The attacks didn't stop. Eric's influence ran deep. He hosted a private dinner with several influential partners and old friends, spinning his version of events and painting himself as the victim of an orchestrated smear campaign. In another part of the city, Nathan and Ava sat across from a small group of investors in a smoky bar, laying out the facts, inviting questions, holding nothing back. Ava felt the tide shifting, even if just slightly. One older investor, a woman with a voice like gravel and hands rough from decades of work, looked Ava in the eye and said, "You remind me of my daughter. Don't back down." Pressure rose from every side. Anonymous letters arrived at Ava's door, thinly veiled threats about her safety, about her family. Nathan received cryptic emails warning him to step aside for the good of the company. In those moments, fear crept in. Still, they pushed forward, refusing to let the darkness take root. Together, they became a symbol imperfect, battered, but unbroken. Then came word that Eric was planning a secret meeting, inviting his most loyal supporters for a closed-door strategy session at a private club downtown. The news reached Ava through a trusted colleague who whispered, "He's not done. He's got something planned." The room felt smaller as Ava listened, her mind racing. Nathan's face was unreadable, but she saw the worry flicker in his eyes before he masked it with calm. The night stretched long. Lights in the city flickered on and off as storm clouds rolled in, promising rain. Ava stood at her window, watching the city below, wondering how many battles could be won before something gave. In the silence, Nathan appeared behind her, wordless, a steady presence. The future was uncertain, but as the first drops of rain tapped the glass, Ava felt something shift, not hope exactly, but the bare beginning of a new resolve. The phone rang again, and neither of them moved at first. Then Nathan reached for it, his hand steady as ever, and answered in the dark. Rain slicked the pavement outside Orion Group's headquarters. Inside, the atmosphere was so tight it seemed even the marble pillars could feel it. It was early evening. The city's lights glimmered through long windows, blurred by water and the cold inside. Ava smoothed her skirt before entering the conference room. Nathan close behind. He looked steady, though his jaw was set tight. Every seat around the polished table was filled board members, attorneys, shareholders, and on the far side, Eric, his gaze cold and watchful, a subtle twitch in his fingers betraying the pressure. The room fell silent as Ava took her place. The chairperson's voice was thin. "Miss Campbell, you may proceed." For a moment, the only sound was the low hum of the city below. Ava glanced at Nathan, then began. Her voice, though soft, carried a weight it never had before. She laid out every fact, every timeline, every contradiction uncovered over the weeks of turmoil. She called on the testimony of witnesses, brought out digital records, and played the critical audio file revealing Eric's hidden collusion with rival investors. At first, the faces around the table were hard to read. A few frowned, others sat rigid, some skeptical, some just tired. But as Ava pressed on, something shifted. Doubt gave way to discomfort, then to reluctant belief. The data was undeniable. Her words cut through the air, measured but clear. What we choose tonight, she finished, will decide not just Orion's future, but who we are to each other. Then, unexpectedly, the senior staffer who'd once questioned Ava stood up, a quiet woman named Mrs. Griffin. Hair pulled back, voice barely above a whisper. She affirmed Ava's findings. "I know what I saw," she said, recalling the moments when Eric pressured her to ignore certain files, to shred certain reports. "I was afraid before. I'm not anymore." Across the table, Eric's mask began to slip. The tension built as the floor opened for debate. Eric tried to regain control, casting aspersions on Ava's background, hinting at some secret alliance between her and Nathan. "She's only here because of him." Eric spat, voice rising, because she wanted a seat at the table, not justice. But Nathan, for the first time, spoke directly. His tone was level, but his words struck deep. "If protecting this company means giving up my shares, I'll do it here and now." The board stirred. He took out a signed waiver, placing it on the table for all to see. The room froze, the meaning sinking in. Nathan's gesture left Eric with nothing to attack. There was a long pause. Then Mrs. Griffin spoke again. If only more of us could act with that kind of courage. Her eyes lingered on Eric, then turned away. The debate resumed, voices overlapping, legal language mixing with personal appeals. Some argued for stability, some for change. At the height of the argument, Eric lost his composure. He pounded the table, knuckles white, voice ragged. "You're all fools if you think she can save you." Silence followed. His anger echoed, brittle and sharp. In that hush, the board's attorney opened an envelope just delivered containing the secret contract Eric had forged months ago. His signature clear on every page, the evidence was final. There was nothing left to defend. Eric slumped back, defeat settling on his shoulders. For the first time, he looked smaller, just a man whose plans had run out. Ava felt her heart pounding, her chest rising with each shallow breath. She looked at Nathan, who nodded, a quiet affirmation between them. They had risked everything, and here, at last, the room was theirs, not through force, not through anger, but by standing side by side. The board moved quickly, a vote called, hands raised, words muttered, as the gavel struck, marking the new beginning. Ava met Nathan's eyes across the crowded room. Outside, the rain eased, a hint of moonlight crept in, softening the edges of everything. In that moment, hope flickered alive, small, but real. She let her hand rest on the cool surface of the table, her mind racing not with fear, but with the first true taste of freedom she'd felt in years. Nathan's smile was tired, but it held the world in it. And as the others began to file out, no one said a word about what it had cost them to get here. Ava understood. Now, that victory was not loud. Sometimes it was only the quiet certainty in two people's eyes, knowing they would not walk alone again. Spring rain tapped gently on the wide windows of the Langham, brushing the glass with a quiet rhythm that matched the hush inside the private dining room. A year had passed, but the memory of how everything began seemed to hang in the air, woven into the elegant cream linen and the laughter rising from clusters of friends gathered around candlelit tables. Ava stood by the far window, the city's glow behind her, a faint, peaceful smile in her eyes. Her dress was simple ivory silk, sleeves loose to her wrists, hair pinned up with a single gold comb. She didn't need more. Nathan crossed the room, pausing as he reached her side. He looked older now. There were soft lines at the corners of his mouth, and a certain ease in his posture that only comes from having survived the storm. No one made speeches that night. There was no call for it. The people who mattered were their Mrs. Griffin from the board, who nodded to Ava with quiet pride, Marcus, who raised a glass from across the room, even a few faces who'd once been doubters, now friends in the wake of all that had changed. The old wounds had not vanished, but something softer had grown over them, trust, hard-won, and never taken for granted. Ava slipped her hand into her purse and pulled out a folded receipt, edges worn from being opened and closed so many times. She ran her finger over the faded ink. It was the original $500 invoice she'd written Nathan that first week, the one that changed everything. She held it up with a small, private grin. Across the top, Nathan had scrawled with a ballpoint, in his quick, slanted print, paid in full with love, interest forever. She hadn't shown it to anyone. It was her reminder of the girl she'd been, all sharp edges and quiet hope, and the man who saw her worth before she ever truly believed it herself. They stood together, just inside the pool of lamplight. Nathan reached for her hand, threading his fingers through hers, grounding her. No one else noticed, but that was the way they liked it. Around them, the gentle murmur of voices rose and fell. It was nothing grand, no orchestras, no flashbulbs, just people who'd chosen to be there. Sometimes, Ava thought, healing didn't come with fireworks or declarations. It came in the way Mrs. Griffin brushed past, touching Ava's shoulder, in the way Nathan's hand stayed steady in hers, warm and certain, in the silent promise that tomorrow would be built together, no matter what the world outside decided to throw their way. Near midnight, Ava walked out onto the small balcony, the city far below. She breathed in, the cool air filling her lungs, the future stretching wide. Nathan joined her, slipping his arm around her waist. They stood in quiet for a long while. Then, softly, Nathan whispered, "I'd do it all again." Ava turned, her face open, gentle. "Me too," she said, voice low, full of all the days they had yet to live. They didn't look back. There was no need for speeches or last words, just two people, changed by everything, standing side by side as the world moved quietly around them, each one knowing the cost and the gift of learning how to love with their eyes wide open. Outside, the city lights flickered against the evening, throwing patterns across faces that once held only doubt. Somewhere, a forgotten receipt rested in a drawer, just paper, but heavy with all that had been risked and revealed. Sometimes, the bravest things are never spoken aloud, only carried in the way two people look at each other when the world quiets down. Maybe trust is built like that, slow, invisible, steady. What matters most isn't what others see, but what we choose to believe, even when it's hard. And maybe, in the hush after all the noise, that's where hope finds its way back in,